Hello and welcome to Story 48. Skene Manor, its spirits, and some other doings. So I don't have to talk so loud. This is one of my Whitehall stories. It happened in Whitehall, New York, back roughly around 1990. Actually, the period of time was 87 to 93 that these stories took place. They're pretty interesting stories. I think I've kind of saved them for last, or at least till this point. I was a training sergeant. I was active duty Army, but a training sergeant working active duty Guard Reserve at the Armory there. It was a beautiful little town. I never heard of the place. I'll give the background, actually my story 49, which actually occurs right before this story, but I'm saving that one for last. Has to do with things probably demonic and pretty powerful story, I think. Pretty out there. So I want to tell this one first, even though this one happened just after Story 49. They're not in chronological order. They're in order whatever I feel like telling them. You know, it could have happened last week, could have happened 30 years ago. Here's a little guy carved, Earl, right. I carved this guy, Earl. He used to have a gun. He was holding a gun like he's robbing you. I gave him to my son. He's carved out of cherry wood. And he got broken. So I'm going to put an arm back on him, the gun, and I'm going to give him a new hat out of cherry wood eventually. Hang in there, Earl. We'll fix you up. All right, so this one takes place at the Skene Manor. And if you Google the Skene Manor, you'll find quite a bit on it. It's a landmark, if not the landmark, of Whitehall, New York, which Whitehall goes back, the town, colonial years, goes back to like the 1750s, was when the first whites really settled there. So it has a lot of French and Indian War and Revolutionary War history, stuff like that. And Skene Manor is actually, I drew that pencil picture of it on the title page, but I'll put up some pictures of it, stock pictures off the web, while I read a little history. So here's those pictures. And I'm going to read what I wrote down about the place while I go through those pictures. Skene Manor was constructed in the 1870s by stonecutters and masons imported direct from Italy, who first quarried the manor stone right out of the mountain where it was built upon. And then they built the place. Near its completion, tragedy christened the building as one of the Italians that were brought in to do the stonework fell to his death while working on the tower. My crude sketch on the title page here doesn't show the porches or tall trees that wrap around the place. This extravagant marriage of Gothic to Victorian style is named for the colonial era British officer Captain Philip Skene that lived in a house near the site of the present manor. Geographically remote and sparsely populated, Whitehall nonetheless makes the claim to be the true birthplace of the American Navy. And this, like its northern neighbor, Ticonderoga, owns a great deal of colonial history. So, that's the history, roughly, of the Skene Manor. It was built in the 1870s, pictures off. And it had a lot of rumors. It was rumored to be haunted, of course. Gangsters, bootleggers, of course, in the Prohibition years. All kinds of stuff. But I'm just going to get to my story, all right? They had a small bar in the place. And it was a restaurant with a small bar that catered to the boat crowd, because Lake Champlain empties out into South Bay and then it becomes part of the canal system. So you can actually go all the way from Whitehall or St. Lawrence Seaway or anywhere in the world on a boat and get into Whitehall. And the locks are there, and you can get right on through to New York City and on out, through the Hudson Bay and all that. So they got quite a few boats, that come through the locks, passing through, and there's a marina or two there. So the people would stop and explore Whitehall and make it up the top of the mountain, and there's a nice place to have dinner. Interesting place with a great view. She had really good on the wine. Wine was their thing. So they entertained the boat crowd, and generally these people would wine and dine, and then they'd retire to the small bar. And it really wasn't, they might have had 10 chairs in there, It wasn't like it was a rockin', jammin' kind of bar. It was quiet. Old, really old. Everything, of course, stone and wood. I remember the place having really tall ceilings and like dark wood paneling all over the place and stonework. Seemed like it was always dank and dusty. It was an interesting place. But I scored a job actually playing guitar there, because before I played accordion, lo and behold, I played guitar like everybody else, and I sang, or at least I tried to. And I covered anything from, folk music to rock to Celtic, played some classical. So I'd play the dinner music, and then I'd go to the bar and play bar music, whatever I could handle, Beatles or Stones or oldies for back then, What's that got to do with anything? Oh, that's how I kind of came acquainted with the place. I was working at the Armory, and I had an apartment somewhere else in town at the time. So I was single for quite a few years in my life after I got my initial divorce. And I'd never wanted divorce. I had to accept it, but I want you to know that I do not believe in divorce. Only as prescribed by Christ, and I have to say the Catholic Church embraces those guidelines. That if somebody's unfaithful to you, then you have a right to leave if you can't work it out. But I didn't believe in divorce, so I wound up divorced, whether I liked it or not. And just stuck to myself for a number of years after that. Well, I finally met someone, and I'm trying to figure out how to tell this story without getting any liability. It was a long time ago. So I met someone, and of course, I was interested in them. I wanted them to show them my town, because they weren't from my town. They're from another area in New York State where I met them. Very lovely young lady. I was a very handsome young man then, for that matter, so we made a good couple, I guess. I know, I'm just rambling through this. I'll get to it, all right? So, there was no hotels in Whitehall then. I don't think there are even now. There's no bed and breakfast, no hotels. Maybe that's changed. There wasn't any then. There was one place, and that was the Skene Manor. And I knew the owners there because I played guitar at the bar and played guitar for the boat crowd and such, dinner music. Just real mellow stuff, I had a classical guitar. Just real finger-picking, soft music, which kind of helped the ambiance a bit. And they drank more wine. That's where they made their money. So I asked the owner then, a beautiful woman, I miss her and her family. If they, for some reason, are Googling Skene Manor and they watch this video, hello, Cass. I wish you and your family the best. It was good memories I had of knowing you all there at the time. All right. So I asked them to put us up for a night, my fiance, because, of course, I got engaged to get married. I can't be with somebody unless I'm going to be married, right? Something that I'm really laying an egg on this. But, I'm going to tell a story. So I wanted to show off my town to my fiance. And she had a son, 6-year-old son. I'll call him Bill. Everybody's either Bill or John, generic names. And her and her son came up. I picked them up. They came up to my town. And I showed them this beautiful manor, the Skene Manor. Very intriguing. And I'd never spent the night there before. I just used to go there and have a couple of beers, and I played the guitar there and visited with everybody. I knew everybody. It was kind of popular with the staff. So we had dinner, her son and I there, and we had a room upstairs, and the owner put a cot in there for her son. I almost said his real name, Bill. So the three of us would sleep in that room together. All right, so we finished our dinner. We all went upstairs. Bill got into his pajamas, and he went to bed in his cot. And our room was right at the top of the stairs, and the bar situated right at the bottom of the stairs. It was very quiet. There was just a few middle-aged people in there. Just nothing really going on, just conversation. So suddenly, everybody left. Bar closed. And it was just her and I sitting there, and it was really quiet. And come to find out, the owners left too. And that wasn't uncommon, that I'd find myself there alone. And they knew I was staying there, so they figured I had the place that night. So we went upstairs, and the place was just pitch quiet, and then a storm blew in. And this storm was something like right out of the movies. It was just her and I in the place because all the cars were gone, including the owners. And the wind and the lightning was booming and flashing all around this place. And the wind was whistling through the gables and through the pitch roof and just howling and screaming. And I really can't tell you how much this was unusual. And just lightning flashes, and there was knocks on our wall inside the place and knocks on the window. And there weren't any trees outside to be knocking limbs up against the window because I checked. And honestly, her and I both were laying there afraid, somewhat afraid. And then the power went out. Pitch black. And the storm picked up, and it was like there were things going on inside. That building was groaning, howling. There were raps on the wall, raps on the windows. Things were sounding like they were moving around in there. And I heard the place was haunted, but I really didn't put any stock in that. Because I'm telling ghost stories now, but I'm telling you, back then, I did what my mom and my mother said her mother said, was to ignore these things because you just gave them power. And in my life, ignoring them hasn't changed it anyway. So I really wasn't entertaining the stories that the place was haunted, and I was kind of upset because it was kind of scary. I hate to admit it, it was kind of scary. We were in the pitch black, and there were things moving around our room, knocks and stuff, and howls and screeches, and man, just like off a spook house. But this was real. And I remember saying, I wrote all this down. I wrote this down years ago, and I reread it tonight. I remembered it all anyway, but I read it again to pick up any details I might have forgotten. And I remember saying to her, this is BS. I said, if we experience a haunting tonight, I said, I'm going to ask for my money back tomorrow. I was pretty upset because I didn't come there for fright. I came there to romance and impress my fiance and her son. And, fright was on the fare that night. Finally managed to get to sleep and woke up later on that night. Everything was quiet. The storm was gone. It was pitch still. And the power was back on, and I could tell the power was back on because next to the bed, the old school digital clock, if you recall, the power goes out. And of course, they had like the big red digital, numbers. Well, that was on. It was flashing 12 a.m. like they do when the power comes on. But here's where the ghost story comes in. One of them. I could hear in the darkness, and my fiance was laying next to me awake. We could hear her son, almost said his name again, Bill, talking to somebody in the dark. Couldn't see him because it was pretty dark in there. And we laid there and listened to him for a little bit before I said anything or turned the lights on. And he was like taking part in a conversation. We couldn't hear anybody else, but we could hear him like saying yes, okay, yes, like responding in a conversation. And we were both kind of a little shook up, weirded out. And I said, I've had enough of this. And I turned the light on the lamp next to the bed. And I almost said his name. Bill had gotten up out of bed and was standing there smiling by his bed. And not only did he get up out of bed, he got himself dressed. So I don't know how long he'd been up talking until I woke up. But he got himself pants and shirt on again out of his PJs. And he looks over at me and I said, Bill, what are you doing up out of bed? And he smiles at me, and he's only 6 years old, 6. He says, oh, hi, Tim. He says, I was talking to the ghost man. And I'm like, oh. I'm like, who? He says, the ghost man, Tim. He said, he's real nice. And I said, Bill, there's nobody there. You know, you need to go back to bed. And Bill interrupted me. He says, no, Tim, he's real nice. He said he had a message for you, Tim. That's what he said. Bill said, the ghost man had a message for you, Tim. He had a message. I said, he had a message for me? He says, yes, he had a message. He's real nice. I'm like, oh, all right. I said, well, what's the message? And Bill said he wanted you to know that he came and went from here and that he was real nice. And he wanted you to know that you didn't need to be afraid of him, that he came and went from here and he's real nice and not to be afraid of him. And I said, what? And he repeated the same thing 3 times. I said, all right, well, you know, I said, well, thanks. Why don't you get back to bed now? And that's pretty much the end of that. Nothing happened that night. Left the next day. Didn't say anything about this to the owner or anybody. I thought it was pretty strange. And my fiance and her son concluded the weekend. It was a weekend trip, and they went back to their hometown, which was quite a couple hundred miles off. And I went back to work, and we continued to date occasionally. And I was just about to get married. Now, let's see. Where do we go with this? Because I've got to skip forward. Yeah, everything seemed to be going okay in the relationship, I thought. I was rushing into things, for sure. I will say that. Totally rushing into things, which, what are you going to do? You can't go back and relive life, can you? Hindsight. Well, I was pretty well off, for me, well off. I could afford to get a house, any house, and I had a decent job, a good reputation. I had a good job in that town. I mean, for a small town to have a job like that was a pretty good. It had solid benefits and had a career and a little bit of prestige. I was a training sergeant, for that town's guard, and that town's guard had been there for quite a while, so that it was kind of a tradition in that town. And I was an outsider; nobody knew me, but they were all glad to have me there because I was a very good soldier at that point in my life. I'd just gotten out of the 82nd Airborne, where I was a sergeant in that, and I was a very good soldier, if I do say so myself. I considered myself a professional in that regard. 11 Bravo infantrymen, parachutist, all that stuff. A really hard-charging kind of guy. So things are going all right in my relationship, so I thought. We're getting ready to get married. I get us a nice place, a country house in the out of town, about 17 miles out of town. In fact, it was in Putnam Station. The same one as one of my stories with the Memento Mori story, which I thought was a good story. It was the same town as that. It's a beautiful little town just south of Ticonderoga. And this house was really old, but you know what? It was very quiet. Not every house I ever lived in had things happen. So I moved my fiance in with me because I had to go away to the desert for training. That year, I was going to spend 3 weeks in Southern California at Fort Irwin, California, in the Mojave Death Valley, I guess. Desert out there. What was it called? Oh God, I should know this. Well, it's Fort Irwin, California. NTC, National Training Center. Go out there and suffer. And man, it was hot. Jesus, I've got pictures of me out there. If I find one, I'll flash it up here either during this or at the end. I've got pictures of me out in the desert back then. So she came up to stay with me at that house just before it was going to be our nuptial love nest, you know, marriage. It was a nice little house too. And she came up there to stay with me for a while. And, oh, I didn't know. I've got to be careful. I don't want to reveal anybody's names who might stumble into this video. I set myself up for disaster by rushing into things. But I never claimed to be really a smooth operator in that regard. In some regards. Well, I had a new vehicle that I bought. It was, well, actually, I'd had it for about 4 years at that point. So that tells me the year. It would have been 1991. And it only had like 4 more months of car payments on it. And I made all my car payments, and it was up to date. And she didn't have a car. And she said she wanted to go to college. And I said, all right. She didn't like my car. I said, let's get you a car, a new one. I can afford the payments. And I'll use my vehicle, it's a Jeep. We'll use that for collateral, down payment. Because I only had 4 more months left on it. It was only 4 years old. And she says, oh my God, you do that for me? Yeah, sure. Well, what are you going to do for your own car? I said, well, I just need to get back and forth to work. I'll just buy a used car somewhere. And we'll get you something nice and economical on, because college was quite a bit further away. Oh, thank you so much. So I took my vehicle and used it as collateral for a vehicle for her, which it was worth quite a bit of collateral, equity, and put the whole thing in her name. Trustworthy, my soon-to-be wife. Well, I went to Fort Irwin, California. I was out there for 3 weeks and found out how hot it can get on this planet. They had a guy, a soldier, a young man, drop dead from the heat. The guy was only 21 years old, fell dead. They said it was 130 degrees, and there wasn't any shade. I got stories about that place another time. So I finished up my 3 weeks and came back to New York State with my unit to find my place empty. My fiance gone. Of course, the new car gone. Almost all the furniture gone. Just about everything I owned gone, except my bottle collection and a couple other things. A coffee cup, teaspoon, and a mattress. Everything else gone. Even my book of poetry that I loved was gone. I felt kind of flattered. It was worthy to steal, but... All right, so this still ties into the Skene Manor. And I got over it. You know, I honestly didn't stay. I just felt foolish, honestly, that I'd allow myself to get suckered like that. It's kind of embarrassing. But now I had a problem. I had a job, and I had to get back and forth to work. And it was 17 miles one way. And I needed to keep my job. Life moves on. You know, I mend my wounds and move on with life. And forgave that woman. I totally forgave her. And I meant it. And just got on with my life. And but I had to get back and forth to work. And so it started hitchhiking, walking, and jogging. 17 miles one way, 34 miles a day. I usually got a ride, honestly. But sometimes I didn't. And I could run 17 miles back then. I was in good shape. And I'm not exaggerating either. But it just wasn't working out. And so I had to move back to town. And I wasn't rich. I consider myself well off because I could pay my bills and stuff. But that's about it. I was living on a sergeant's income for that year with rations, BAH. So I figured I'd just move back into town. It was summertime, and I'd rough it, you know. I'd sleep out. I'd take 3 weeks and just kind of camp out in the village or around the village. And no problem there, you know. I could put together a few paychecks and get myself a place and get back on my feet and move on with life, you know. And that's what I was doing. And I got a couple stories from that period of time. I walked around. I had a green Army bag, laundry bag. I had a poncho and a poncho liner in, Army, of course, and probably, I think, I don't know, what else? Who knows what else in there? Bottle of beer, I don't know. I remember the first place I camped out on was on a hill behind, I had friends. Behind their house was a little hill right on the outside of town. And I had something weird happen there. I wouldn't call it paranormal, with a raccoon. And it was summertime, so I was laying on top of my sleeping bag, my Army sleeping bag, on the ground, on my back. Sleeping bag just partially zipped up with pretty much my chest and everything, you know, exposed out under the stars. Beautiful night out. Well, I woke up, and I am not making this up. This is bizarre. I woke up in the middle of the night. Something was standing on my chest. Something. You know, I felt like I had about 20 pounds, and something cold and wet was brushing up against my nose like that while I slept. And I opened my eyes, and it took me a while because the night starry sky was above it for my eyes to adjust, and there was a raccoon sitting on my chest, and he was leaning over with his nose, and he's going like this, brushing his nose up against my nose, right? Like he's just leaning over doing this with his nose brushing my nose. And it took me, my nose itch. And I'm like, yeah, wow. I threw that thing. I mean, it was just an instinct, reflex. I threw that thing, it went flying about 15 feet and hit the ground, the dirt, and rolled. And I'm like, what the heck? I kind of sat up, and it didn't go away. If this was me, this is me laying down. I knew he'd come in handy. I don't know why I had him here. It was like circling around me. And I was tired. I wanted to get back to sleep. And as soon as my eyes closed, that thing would be up, and he was trying to climb into the sleeping bag with me. Honestly, he's trying to climb into the sleeping bag with me. A raccoon. And I'm not new to the country. They may look cute, and they're interesting animals and all, but they can rip you up. Honestly, they have teeth, and they know how to defend themselves. So I threw this thing out again, and it came back. Like the third time I threw this thing out, every time I started to fall asleep, this raccoon kept trying to climb into my sleeping bag with me. I'm not making this up. I shouldn't have to say that. Everything I'm telling on these stories, I'm not making any of it up. Any of it. Oop. So, this may sound mean to some of you, but I had to make this thing go away. And I took one of my Army boots and threw it and hit it dead on, poof, when it was circling around me. And that was enough. It ran off. I never saw it again. Needless to say, I didn't sleep there again that night, right? So I went down to the village by the canal. They have a park where it's all grassy by the water, the canal, and the water and the locks. It's kind of nice there. It was real close to my work. My work was in the middle of the village. So I thought I'd sleep on the grass in the park for a while. I really didn't care if somebody thought I was transient or not. I don't really care. Problem with the park was it got too many people were in there. I didn't know it, but at nighttime, even after they had a few bars in town, they closed. Just everybody seemed to congregate down there at the canal by the park. I didn't have any problems with anybody, but I couldn't sleep either, you know? So I decided to get up and walk up the canal a ways, which is to say, go south on the canal, south, out of town, out of the village, just a little ways, see if I can find a better place. And I found a railroad bridge that goes over the canal, not very far south out of town, out of south, whatever. That didn't sound right. Well, the railroad bridge underneath it had a concrete slab, like they do, with a all metal, big steel structure railroad bridge going over it. And the concrete slab was nice. The water was about this far away, like had an edge and it dropped straight, and the canal water's right there. So I could lay next to it and I could hear the water softly lapping up against, the concrete shelf that I was kind of laying on with the railroad bridge right above my head. And of course, in the middle of the night, I fell asleep and the train came over about maybe 10, 12, 15 feet above my head, which was pretty spectacular. I kind of thought it was cool, so long as it didn't go on all night. But that thing went away and it was all quiet there and just the water lapping by the canal. And I was thinking, this is a perfect place. I found the perfect spot to sit and to sleep out and exist while I'm saving up money from my job to get myself a new place closer to town and get my life back together. That night, I could not sleep next to that canal underneath that bridge. I had the heebie-jeebies like crazy. Just felt like creeped out. And I don't know why, because at this point in my life, at this time of my life, I was used to sleeping outdoors alone. The darkness didn't scare me at all. In fact, I kind of got used to that from my years in the Army, where we trained, we did everything at night. And so I got, without flashlights or anything, the night is our friend, our ally. So, but yet I was really creeped out here, and it was dark there. So I got back up. I said, I give up, man. I got to get some sleep. I can't sleep here. It's too spooky. I don't know what it is about it. And I walked back up the canal, back to where I came from by the park. Nobody was there. It was probably about 4 in the morning. Crashed out in the grass. Woke up the next morning. And this was weird. There's like 3 guys standing around me where I'm sleeping. They're standing around. I'm laying on the ground wrapped up in a green army poncho. And I look up and these guys are standing about 6 feet away from me. And they're all just standing there smoking. They're not saying anything. And I got up. Nobody said a word. I think I smoked back then. I hate to say it. Seems like I stood there with them and I had a cigarette, bummed a light off one, put all my stuff back in the bag, and then walked off, and nobody said a word. It was just kind of weird. I can't imagine, like, if I went to a park, to just go by the water and have a cup of coffee and with a couple other guys, why they would walk up. That place was a pretty big park. Why they're standing right by me. I don't know. Not saying a word. Maybe they're just looking at me, wondering what I was doing while I was crashed out, wondering if I was on drugs or something, which I wasn't. Yeah, that's strange. Well, it wasn't long after that. This is where the Skene Manor comes back in. But before I talk about that, this is where I went to work that day. And the guy I worked with, Rod, a friend of mine, he told me that they found a man under that bridge that I slept under in the water, dead that day. That apparently that night, the guy was known kind of a drunk in town, and they said the guy apparently had been intoxicated and fallen off the railroad bridge and hit his head on something, probably the concrete that I was laying on, and then went into the water. And I didn't tell anybody that I was under that bridge that night, for they start thinking maybe I did it, which I certainly didn't. But I thought that's why I got the heebie-jeebies, because I didn't know it at the time, but there was a guy floating in the water, probably right next to where I was laying, Probably why I got the heebie-jeebies. And I wrote all this down years ago. So, back to the Skene Manor. This is a weird story. I'm walking around. I had time to kill. Usually, I get out of work, 4 or whatever, whenever I got out. And it was summertime, so things didn't get dark till 8:30 or 9. I really just had to kill some time. I just walked around town. hang out here, walk around for a while before I found a place to sleep, for the night. Well, I'm walking through the village one day after work, and a big old Cadillac that I knew belonged to Cass, the owner at the time of the Skene Manor, and one of her barmaids was driving. These are all people I knew, liked all of them. And Cass rolls the window down, and they pull up alongside of me. I'm walking down the sidewalk, and Cass say, "Hey, how's it going, Tim?" It's going all right. I was hiding everything. I was pretty bummed out about everything that had happened, in my life with the marriage and the house and the property. And she said, "I heard about your fiance." And I'm thinking, great. And word gets around in a small town, I found it embarrassing, honestly. And I said, "Yeah, well, that's life." She said, "So where are you staying?" I said, "Here and there." She said, "Where are you staying, Tim?" She probably heard that I was sleeping out all over the place. And I knew that. And I said, "Oh, here and there." She said, "I can offer you a room." And I stopped walking at this point. And she said, $35 a night, or $35 a week. Really, seriously. With the agreement that I continue to play guitar there. That would help cover my rent. And I did handyman work around the place as needed. $35 I could, I sucked it up. Back then I had a little more pride than I do now. Back then I wouldn't be telling these stories for the worldwide audience. No way. Now I figure I don't have anything to lose, and why not? I like to entertain. So, and there's a little purpose to this one too. It will give glory to God in a way, you'll see. So I said, "Well, I'll let you know. That's awful nice of you. I'll let you know." And then she said, "All right." And with a smile, she drove off in her Cadillac with her barmaid, lovely young woman as I remember. The very next day after work, I waited a day. I didn't want to rush. I walked up the hill after work and told her, "I'll accept your offer." So fine, I'm moving into the Skene Manor, right? What room do you think she put me in? I didn't get to pick my room. She put me in the same room that I stayed in, many months earlier, it was, I don't know how, maybe 6 months earlier, right? I'm staying in the same room. Lo and behold, coincidence. All right, where am I going with this? Things did happen there. It was haunted. I guess I'll tell the ghost stories that occurred while I was there. My room was part of a suite. And I didn't know this at the time, but I learned that I had this room, and this is my room, and this is a part of a room that attached to my room, but it's only acceptable through a door. There's a wall separating them. Maybe I'll put a floor plan up. I will put a floor plan up. If I don't, I don't. All right, I'll just tell a story. I'm just going to tell a story. So there was another room attached to mine that wasn't part of my room. It was fully furnished. Everything was fully furnished with authentic Victorian furniture. Very well done. Dark, tall ceilings. Every room had its own fireplace. Every room had its own marble fireplace. You get the idea. Well, I didn't know this at the time. I'll get to this. I didn't even find it out till later. But I would hear the adjoining room to mine, the door was kept locked. Not to me. It was open. I could go in there from inside my room. But in the hallway, you couldn't go in there. The door was locked. Big old skeleton keys, authentic 1870s stuff. Well, I'd hear periodically the place getting trashed in there. And I always thought that, maybe he was the owner with her boyfriend, or, I just tried to put it out of my mind. I didn't think about it. So one time in particular, I was in there, it was a Saturday, as I recall. And that room is getting trashed. I mean, bed bouncing off the wall, furniture bouncing around. I mean, I'm thinking, I can't ignore this. I'm leaving, man. I think I have to admit what I was thinking, that the owner was having some rough sex, very impassioned, rough sex in there. Something. What else would it be? The whole room sounds like a punk rock band is in there demolishing the place. So I thought, well, all right, I'm leaving. I'm leaving this place. Whatever's going on there, I don't want to know. As soon as I step out of my room into the hallway, quiet, pitch quiet. And then I noticed that, well, what happened? Oh, I left. I left the place. And then when I went outside, I saw that there were no cars there, meaning I was the only person in the building. I didn't see anybody either. And the staff wasn't there. The place was closed. The owner had gone off somewhere. She did quite often. I found myself all alone there quite often. So I was all alone there. I drove off for a few hours. I came back. When I came back, the owner was coming back in her car just as I was getting into the place. And I told her what has happened upstairs, you know, and she was really interested because she knew the place was haunted. And unlike me, she really was excited about it. She thought it was cool. And so we went in that room. The door was locked from the hallway. Opened the door, expected to see the place turned upside down. And nothing. The bed still made, no wrinkles on the bed. Nothing disturbed. Tables, chairs, all in place. Even the dust wasn't disturbed. I told you it was going to be a long one. My dog's here. Hello, buddy. Hi, buddy. I'll be done shortly. That was one of the things. But I found out that a young man had committed suicide in there. Not, well, I don't, because the family, I got to be careful with this. This happened some years before I moved in there, but not enough years that there are people in town knew this man and knew the events around it. And I talked to some people older than myself that knew this guy, and he lived there with his family, and he had some issues, and he was severely depressed, and he couldn't get free of it, and he took his life. In my understanding, he took his life in that room. He couldn't get past his depression. And the people in town all said they said the nicest, they said he was a very nice person, very soft-hearted person who got hurt. I think he got hurt. And the world can be a tough place for a good person, seriously. And it just got to be too much for the guy, and he took his life in there. And I have a feeling that's probably who the ghost man was. This is where we go back to the beginning of this. The ghost man had a message he told Bill, 6-year-old, to tell Tim that he came and went from this place and that he was nice and that I didn't need to be afraid of him. I bet it was the same. I bet it was the same spirit. That nothing ever happened in my room. It was just that room next to mine, part of the suite that got trashed. So there was a couple other things that happened. I'll tell those, and I'll tell about what I think I learned from this. One time I played guitar. I was in the place down at the bar around noon. The place was closed. I was having a cup of coffee. Not a beer or anything. I didn't do any drugs. You have to take my word on that. But I was also an active duty career soldier, so I didn't do any drugs. I was having a cup of coffee at the bar, practicing guitar, bluegrass, as I recall, flat picking. And God, what can I use? I'll use my hat. On the bar in front of me, about this far away, there was a box of Kleenex on the bar. And I'm playing guitar. There's nobody else in the building. Definitely nobody in that bar room. And this box of Kleenex just picks up, hovers about this high up off the bar right in front of me. Just hovers there for about this long and then drops. And I'm like, stop playing. I put the guitar down. Without taking my eyes, I'm like, what the heck? First thing I did was start feeling around for wires, right? How did I just saw this thing clearly levitate right in front of me, about this high up off the table, and then drop. I'm feeling around for wires and stuff. There aren't any. It occurs to me I'm not alone in that room. You know, that whoever did whatever did that, probably still in there, probably standing there watching me. So I just left for the day, and I came back when the place opened and people were there. That was an event. The people said that the customers and the staff there said that it was attached to my music, my guitar playing and singing, which I think is kind of flattering. But they always said after I get done playing there, I'd always leave my guitar right at the bar. The strings would start strumming. After I left the room, the strings would strum on their own. And I had a lot of people tell me that, staff and clients. And they used to have seances there. And I don't go for that stuff. But I'm not one to tell people what they should and shouldn't do, you know. But I don't go for that stuff for my Christian reasons. I don't believe Christian reasons. I don't believe it's wise and or godly to partake in those kind of things. And they brought up psychic mediums from New York City, like well-known psychics and mediums from New York City, to come up into that place for the weekend, and they make an event out of it, a weekend event, where they do ghost hunts and psychic medium stuff. And they did this about every couple of months. And the psychic there, or the medium, I'm not sure which, a lady from New York City is very well credentialed on this stuff. And she said, there's a spirit of a woman there that is strongly attracted to a young man who plays music here. I was back then about 29, 30. And so it was obviously it was me, because it goes along with the guitar strings being strung, and when I'm playing my guitar, it picked up to get my attention, you know. And they really wanted me, really cajoled me to try to take part in some of their spiritual medium seances and such. When the people would come up from the city, I wouldn't do it. Never did. Never. That's just part of the ghost stories there. Something else. I think I'm going to leave it at that. There's just they just all said that it was attached to me, that things would fly off when I left the room. It wasn't just the guitar strumming. They said that this, when this happened, it was cassette tapes and things, CDs, cassette tapes would fly off the shelf. Things would fly off the shelf, fly across the room. I had a lot of people tell me that. There were other things. But I want to say, I'm going to close with this, all right? I want you to remember back at the beginning of this, when I talked about the Spirit told young Bill to tell Tim, me, specifically me, that he came and went from that place, and that he was nice, and I didn't need to be afraid of him. And to be sure and tell Tim that specific three things. He came and went from the place, that I didn't need to be afraid of him because he was real nice. Now, I had no idea when this happened, the turn of events that would take place in my life, kind of a hard turn of events, of losing everything and having found myself homeless for a little while, and wind up being offered, I didn't ask for it, I was offered that room. In the same room I'd wind up in, that this event happened with young Bill. So I'm saying, I'm pretty sure the Spirit knew at that time, in the first part with Bill and the nice ghost man visiting, that Spirit knew the future, that I would wind up living in that room, right? That's why he wanted to make sure that I knew that I didn't have to worry about him, that he was nice. And I think he also knew that I was going to wind up getting my heart broken and my trust betrayed. And maybe I felt a kindred spirit because this fella committed suicide under somewhat similar circumstances. Maybe he thought a kindred soul with me of sorts, enough that he would go out of his way to tell that child to let me know that I didn't need to be afraid of him. Because he definitely was trashing that room next to mine. And there were other things that went on, but I don't remember them. That's what I remember. Now, what I want to say about this is that I think this is evidence, as other things are, that in a spiritual life, they can see the future. And in the Old Testament and the New Testament, the Bible talks about this, right? And that they could see the future. On a spirit level, time, it doesn't exist as we know it. The past, the present, all laid out, in some way that we can't experience in this dimension, however you want to word it. I'm going to read to you, this is one case of this in the Bible. This is in the New Testament. It also is told in the Old Testament in places, but this is out of Acts 16 to 18. Acts chapter 16, verses 16 through 18. And I'll post that up over this someplace. One day, this is Apostle Paul writing. One day, as we were going to the place of prayer, we met a slave girl who had a spirit of divination and brought her owners a great deal of money by fortune telling. Let me say that again. We met a slave girl who had a spirit of divination, I hope I'm saying that right, and brought her owners a great deal of money by fortune telling. That is, they could tell, you pay them money. It was the girl and they call it a familiar spirit in other places in the Bible. Depends upon, but supposedly people kept a familiar spirit that they got paid money and they could ask what the future of events were. They'd ask the spirit that, and the spirit would tell the person, and the person would tell them, you're going to lose the battle, or you're going to win your lawsuit, or this person, whatever they're asking. They just have to know the future. Well, we'll pay some money. This girl has a spirit of divination, and she can find out what the future is. And it brought her owners a great deal of money by fortune telling. Right? They could see the future. It's in here. And so could that one in my story just now backs this up. Or this backs that up both. Supports each other. Because I did figure out that spirit knew I was going to wind up getting my heart broke and everything, and wind up homeless and then living in that room where it committed suicide, most likely, in that suite some years before. I'll finish the verse. While she followed Paul and us, I guess it wasn't Paul writing this, but it's in the book of Acts, she would cry out, "These men are slaves of the Most High God, who proclaimed you a way of salvation." She kept doing this for many days. But Paul, very much annoyed, turned and said to the spirit, "I order you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her." And it came out of her that very hour. So I guess she carried it with her. I didn't get that till just now, actually. I thought it was her, but they're saying the spirit that was in her, which enabled her to tell the future, said, "These men are slaves of the Most High God, who proclaim to you a way of salvation." And she kept doing this for many days. But Paul, very much annoyed, turned and said to the spirit, "I order you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her." And it came out of her that very hour. And that's Acts 16, verses 16 through 18. And I thought that's worth bringing up because that's the one thing I learned from that story. And that's pretty much it. I've gone on for quite a ways, but I'll probably remember things I forgot. But, well, that's it, folks. Thank you for tuning in. Next one, story 49, going to be a Bigfoot and such. Bigfoot. And some others, actually. Story 49 is going to be a lengthy story. I don't know whether to break it up or not, but it's going to be at least an hour. But you're going to get some encounters there. A couple of them, at least 2 or 3. It's when I was living in the woods, I encountered things, and they followed me.